You know, history books usually measure the outcome of a war by drawing some new lines on a map, right? Or maybe by counting the, frankly, unimaginable human cost. But sometimes, the absolute most profound legacy of a conflict is completely invisible. It's not a new border, it's not a bronze monument in a city square. It is a fundamental seismic shift in human thought. In this explainer, we're unpacking the Chaco War, and we are looking way beyond the dust, the trenches, and the immediate geopolitical fallout of the 1930s. We're examining a strategic footprint so intense and so revolutionary that it literally rewrote the rules of military engagement. The war ended in 1935, but what Paraguay learned never ended. Just think about the sheer weight of that statement for a second. The guns went silent nearly a century ago. The physical battle over the incredibly arid, just punishing terrain of the Gran Chaco came to a close. Yet the intellectual shockwaves from that conflict, the ideas forged out of absolute desperation in that environment, they are very much alive today. They're still echoing in modern command centers, actively shaping how global forces prep for conflicts right now. So we aren't just looking at some dusty historical event here. We are looking at the literal birth of a modern military philosophy. Okay, let's dive right into this. Section 1, the invisible legacy, and synthesizing this doctrine. To really grasp this, we have to deconstruct their operational pillars. It's like a giant puzzle. First up, Paraguay took the rigid, highly disciplined influence of Prussian military doctrine, which was the standard of the day. But they didn't just copy and paste it. They mutated it. They combined it with our second pillar, decentralized command. See, in the incredibly dense, confusing brush of the Chaco, generals sitting way back at the rear couldn't micromanage. It was impossible. So they had to trust local, on-the-ground commanders to make split-second, literal life-or-death decisions. Third is environmental adaptation. Instead of fighting the terrain, they started using the green hell of the Chaco as an ally. And finally, operational speed over size. They figured out, quite brilliantly, that moving faster and striking unpredictably was infinitely more valuable than just fielding a larger, slower army. Which brings us to the core of the whole thing: mind over matter and the intellectual weapon. Just look at this stark material disparity. This brilliantly illustrates the problem. Conventional military logic, the exact kind of logic taught in literally every elite military academy back in the 1920s, dictated that the side with overwhelming material resources, better funding, and superior numbers is going to win. Paraguay had a mere fraction of that material weight. If you run this exact scenario through a standard war game simulation based purely on logistics and firepower, Paraguay loses. Fast and hard. There's no way around it. But let's shatter that conventional assumption for a minute and put on a modern operational lens. Bolivia essentially fell victim to material rigidity. They relied heavily on their numbers and their conventional tech, trying to fight what was basically a European-style war in a South American wasteland. Paraguay, on the other hand, was completely stripped of the luxury of overwhelming firepower. So they were forced into strategic flexibility. They weaponized the environment itself. They relied on rapid decision-making. Basically, they didn't try to match Bolivia's hammer. They became the water, flowing right around it. And this brings us to a really profound definition: strategic thought as a weapon. Paraguay didn't just defeat Bolivia's army, right? They defeated Bolivia's methodology. They proved on the ground that ideas, high-level adaptability, and a superior framework of thinking can mathematically and decisively overcome a heavily armed, technologically superior force. They essentially transformed their way of thinking into their single most lethal asset on the battlefield. So how does this bridge to today? Let's look at its application in modern warfare and its global impact. If we walk through the timeline, tracing this doctrinal evolution reveals a massive, massive shift. In the 1930s, we see the absolute necessity of decentralized command in the Chaco. Fast forward a bit to the late 20th century, and you start seeing global militaries beginning a huge transition toward agile warfare, finally realizing that massive, slow-moving infantry lines are completely obsolete. By the 21st century, this evolves entirely into modern flexible force doctrine. Today's elite military units operate almost exactly on the principles refined by Paraguay back then. They are small, highly autonomous, environmentally adapted, and blindingly fast. It's actually a fascinating debate. If you ask a traditional historian, they'll tell you these tactics were born purely out of desperation and necessity, just a highly localized response to survive the horrific Chaco terrain. But if you talk to a modern strategist today, they'll counter that entirely. They'll argue that what was just desperate improvisation in 1932 is now the deliberate, absolute gold standard for multi-domain, rapid response global deployments.
I mean, the most well-funded militaries on Earth today spend billions of dollars trying to artificially replicate the exact strategic flexibility that Paraguay achieved organically out of pure survival instinct.
So the crucial point here is understanding the universal lessons. What we're uncovering here aren't just localized old-school tactics. They are absolute, universal truths of asymmetric engagement. First, strategy is strictly greater than force. A clever maneuver is always going to outflank a blunt impact. Second, speed is greater than size. Your ability to act inside your opponent's decision-making cycle, to strike them before they even know you've moved, that renders their massive size totally irrelevant. And third, adaptation is greater than rigidity. The very moment you rigidly commit to a single plan, you become predictable. And in any conflict, predictability is pretty much a death sentence. Which kind of forces us to pause for a second and ask a really deep, almost philosophical question. What does it actually mean to win a war? Seriously, think about it. Is it just planting a flag on a hill? Is it signing a piece of paper on a desk? Or is it something much, much deeper? If you defeat an enemy on the field, but you use a method that bankrupts your own country or leaves your doctrine entirely obsolete for the next conflict, did you actually win? And that leads us to our final point, the true meaning of victory. Weapons change. The old bolt-action rifles and early, clunky machine guns of the 1930s, they've been replaced by drones, smart munitions, cyber warfare. The physical hardware of destruction is always temporary. Uniforms change. The aesthetics, the camouflage patterns, the high-tech gear that armies carry into the field today, these things are constantly evolving to match new environments and new eras. Battlefields change. We've moved from the dense, thorny brush of the Gran Chaco to dense urban warfare, and now to digitized, invisible networks spanning the entire globe. The arena itself is never static. But the way of thinking about war, that never changes. The absolute necessity for intellectual superiority, for decentralized command, for operating with just lightning speed, and for weaponizing your own mind when your physical resources are totally exhausted. That strategy is immortal. Paraguay didn't just win a territorial dispute in the jungle. They proved an enduring mathematical truth about human conflict. The mind always conquers the material. If you understood this war, you didn't just learn history. You learned how to think. I want to leave you with that challenge today. Don't just file the Chaco War away as some random date in a textbook. Look at your own challenges, situations where you might be out-resourced or outnumbered. Apply this high-level strategic thinking. Because when you finally realize that strategy can overcome force, the rules of what is actually possible completely change.